Good afternoon. On behalf of the Slate Valley Museum, I want to thank you for attending this talk, either by Zoom or in person. And my talk is on a brand new exhibition, and that is One Mural, Many Stories, exploring the legacy and context of a Slate Valley WPA mural. And first of all, I want to thank those who have made this day kind of possible for me. It's been a long journey, in the sense that when I was with the museum a few years back, I really became attached to the story of Martha Levy or Levy. And so I thank Sarah, our executive director, for bringing us together again. And I want to thank friends and family who have been supportive of my research and my discussion of what I've been doing, and especially Marlene, my wife. So this is going to be a little trip back to the 30s and even further back, because the context that I used for the exhibition is bringing us back to 1893, when American artists were first really called to gather together to do American mural art. Prior to that, most of it came through Europe, and many of the American artists came back in 1893 to participate with the World Columbian Exposition. And that's really the starting point for mural art. And one other aspect of it is that there were many organizations that supported the concept of architecture, art, and mural painting, as well as landscape architecture. And so we'll look at that a little bit, and look at some of the movements that were established. I think Chicago, where the exhibition took place, was really a big factor, even though other traditions were starting to take place with the architecture. The Beaux-Arts and classical art of the exhibition was what carried through and carried on to cities like New York. And for this exhibition, we really focus on Washington, D.C. And some of the people, the government aspect of it is reflected in the exhibition itself. Now, one thing I want to point out, if you're watching by Zoom and you're next to your computer, near your computer, and you might want to go to slatevalleymuseum.org and go to the aspect of the top line. I didn't write it down. The experience, excuse me, slatevalleymuseum.org experience, and click on that. And if you scroll down, you'll see a little bit of the story about the mural. For people who are attending by Zoom, some of you I know are not familiar with our region and the mural itself so much. So you might want to check that out. And for all, in the near future, there will be connected to the website a virtual exhibition with a much more, with a expanded story to what is represented on the panels. And I know the people in attendance today not many have really had an opportunity because this is the first day the panels have been open to available to the public. So this is all new. And I hope that my story and talk today will reflect back to much of that, but today's a special event. So my talk is not necessarily, I just want to give everyone a good background on who Martha Levy and the artist who did the restoration conservation work on the mural in 1976, for the bicentennial, who was Dean Fausett. So we're celebrating two artists with this exhibit, both who were WPA artists. Now, excuse me for a second. I will just move this for us. Is there good enough lighting to see for everyone? All right, I want you to try to compare this. This is from this element of the mural. So I'll give you just a moment to take a look at it. See any differences? It's a little hard, but now, all right, I want to give some background. The photographer is Sam Brody. Sam Brody, you may not have heard of, but he was a film maker in the 30s, a photographer, mainly with the Work Alliance. He was very into the social, political aspect of what was going on in the 30s. And he eventually married the artist, Alice Neal, excuse me. But this photograph, circa March 15th, 1939. Now we know the mural was specifically made for Granville High School and to be in the study hall. But so to be so close to the time period of when this went into place at the high school, perhaps by the September, my guess is that perhaps it was September of that school year. There's some big differences here. But this was the official photographing for the WPA records. But instead of one person handling that piece of stone coming across, there were two, and they're much darker hair, a real different person in appearance, another person with a hat, and then this person with, instead of formed hair going straight back, it's more of a hanging down. So I picked up on that, and the other official photographs are pretty close to the exact representation of the mural. Now, we also had a previous speaker who was an art professor from Castleton University, and he spoke on much of the artistic aspect, and there was a lot of discussion for the people represented in this mural. And I don't know if there was the anticipation that this might be a exhibition on that, but that is something for future reference. But I did take the time to look. This person is referenced on our website as possibly being a Mr. Dickinson. And I did check out Mr. Dickinson. I was able to find some information about him. Mr. Dickinson did work in the slate quarry business, at least in the only thing I can verify was in the early 1930s. And he worked in an aspect of, at that point in time, he was working in an aspect of the industry where granules, he was in a granular mill where they took the slate, reduced it down to use on roofing shingles, more like what we call asphalt shingles today. And they also used granular slate or flour slate for paints and other products, even perfume to some degree. So that's the aspect of the business that I can verify that he was in. And by 1942, he was age 58. He had registered for the war effort, but had left the industry and was working as a carpenter. So there are other people who were identified in this mural, and that is another aspect of things that we want to be able to verify through research and find out as much as we can. But the story is really about what Martha Levy did in 1939. And one other aspect the other point I want to make about Dean Fausett is that in his representation, in the 1890s, there were supporting organizations to movements that supported what I stated before about the architecture and the landscape architects. And one organization was the National Society of Mural Painters. And that was formed in 1895. And in the 1973 to 1983, Dean Fausett served as vice president and then president of the National Society of Mural Painters. So Martha was a painter who attended college in Pittsburgh. She grew up in Pittsburgh, PA. Her parents, this is kind of new information to people, from what we know about Martha. Her parents were Russian Jews, emigrated in the late 1800s through New York City, came to Pittsburgh. They were married in 1900. Martha was born in 1901 and grew up in a section of Pittsburgh that would be the southeast section, heavily a Jewish population. And she would attend the Carnegie Institute of Technology and be a student of art at Carnegie. And her first escapades with going to New York City was in 1921. 1921, Martha took her first class at the Art Students League in New York City. And the interesting point with that through available records is that in 1921, she was listed with a local New York City address of Central Park West. So she was staying in a rather ritzy section of town. Now, her father was in the wholesale clothing business. And apparently, he seems to have done quite well, because through the 1930s and into 1940, she is able to go to Italy, France, and study and gain more education. And she also is reported to start attending programs in Woodstock, New York. And one aspect of the history of Martha is that she has been tied to Woodstock to a great deal as a Woodstock artist. I tend to question the extent of how much she was really a Woodstock colony artist. But we'll get into that a little bit more in the sense of what she did do. So the aspect of that was she moved on into the 1930s and the WPA program starting in 1933. And just at that time, taking 1930 census information, she's living alone in New York City. But another aspect is that she has listed as, not as a boarder, but as another person in her household is a servant. So it's interesting that in 1930, she's trying to make her way as an artist, but she also seemingly has a servant. So we move on, and the New Deal effort starts. And I want to read a quote, because one aspect of what the appeal to some with the interest of the art at that time was the story of women artists and Jewish women artists. And one artist, I'll read this quote. There was a Riva Helfand who taught lithography at the Harlem Art Center through a fine arts program. And she states, "I don't think there was any special situation. We were just people. We were getting paid the same as the men were. There was no discrimination." So everyone was pleased. And if you look at a work, there's no way that you can tell that this wasn't the work of a man or the work of a woman artist. But there are some aspects that records indicate that things were a little different for women artists. The 1940 census happens in Martha's case. She's living in Manhattan still, and she's living on East 21st Street. And she is living in a neighborhood, not in the same, necessarily the same building, but buildings next to her, where there are a sequence of artists. And so I looked at that information, and through that, you can look and find out some more interesting information about Martha and what was happening with some of these other artists. Martha was considered herself as a government worker, as an employee of the United States government, whereas all the other artists just listed that. The 1940 census actually refers to a supplemental section where they ask Martha additional questions to supporting facts. And this is where in 1940 things get a little murky from earlier census records. In 1920, she's 18, just graduating perhaps from high school, entering Carnegie Tech Institute, and having, what I consider accurate information with her age, being 18. By 1930, she seems to massage her age a little bit, making herself a year younger than she is. And by the 1940 census, she lists herself as 35 years of age. Now I know it's the right Martha because we have information. A few years back, some of Martha's work was auctioned. And I forget the initial way I found out about the auction, but it's a New York State auction house auctioned her work along with her sister. Her sister was a part of her journeys along the way. She also attended Carnegie and was in Woodstock in the early 30s with her. But she massages her age by a total of 3 years. So that she's listed as 35 when she really should be 38. And documentation on that, a painting that she did that was auctioned and that has a completion date of 1947 gives her address, and it's the exact same address. So it's verified that that's where she lived, but she massages her age and she changes her parents' place of birth. Instead of being from Russia, her father is from Pennsylvania and her mother is from New York State. And for some reason, well, I think the reason is what's going on in the world politically. She's not changing her name and establishing herself as not a Jew, but she's willing or wanting to not be connected with Russia at that time. Perhaps because Russia had made a military pact in 1930, just the year before, between Russia and the Nazis. And so that might have been an influencing factor. And one other aspect I wanted to point out, that she was, as a government worker, you would think perhaps she had steady employment or steadier employment as an artist. But she had, for that year, the year she produced this mural, the year before, being 1939, she earned $500 and worked a total of 26 weeks. Now, the only other woman artist that was living in her neighborhood was a Dorothea Tanning. And Dorothea worked a total of 20 weeks and earned a salary of $300. Whereas all the other men artists, the remaining 5 artists that lived in that neighborhood, were all earning $960 and had basically worked throughout the year, pretty much. And Dorothea Tanning wasn't at the time working as a WPA artist. She was a commercial artist working for department stores, one specific one at least, and it may have been the only one, but it was Macy's. And Macy's the art director at Macy's introduced her to Peggy Guggenheim, and from there, her life took on its own story, and she ended up with marrying Max Ernst, and was part of Max Ernst actually was seeking out women artists to be a part of Peggy Guggenheim's exhibition by 31 artists. And he and Peggy Guggenheim were together at the time, and Dorothea stole him away. So there was the period of time that she was in Woodstock. She worked with artists like Doris Lee, who worked with Arnold Blanche, and she established herself with other artists in New York City, and she ended up marrying Arnold Blanche at a point in time when he was been married to another artist. So one of the things that seems to be happening, and what other artists, women artists, are getting connected to, who marry, seem to be getting connected to other women, men artists who are big at that time, politically active, and their art career seems to take off, whereas Martha's does not. She seems to be willing to accept her government work, her government employment, but I believe it's because she wants, her ultimate goal is to be a professor, an art professor. And back in 2016, there was, we were working on another exhibition through the museum on WPA programs. It didn't go just the arts. We did have a painting by Martha that was on exhibition, and it was from the Woodstock Historical Society. And she was exhibited here, as well as information about the CCC and the myriad of alphabetical programs. So the effort then was to get more on those, the span of programs, CCC, conservation program, and we weren't highlighting so much Martha. But in doing that, we picked up a set of paintings. John, you'll correct me. John, you're here. Carl Ramsey in 1933, 1934 was a part of the initial PWAP program. And so we had on our wall about 7 or 8 of his orchid prints, and he was famous, but he was, if you compare the number of artists who were doing work through New York City and New York State, there were hundreds. In Vermont, there were only 4, and Carl was one of them. And we had that included in our exhibition back in that time period. One other artist the last program we had with Phil Whitman, and I believe Matt was here. Matt, there was the comment that a couple other people said, this really doesn't seem to fit with the painting. You know, it doesn't fit with the colors of what you would find in our region near a quarry. And I think there are parts of this painting that Martha's trying to make use of the elements to highlight professors and the training that she received either by the Art Students League or others. There is a painting called Half Dome by excuse me for a second. I know I forget. Zorak. Marguerite Thompson Zorak was an artist and a professor at Columbia University. Now, I don't know when the first interaction took place between Martha and Zorak, but I believe, I'm hoping that maybe it's before 1939. I know she graduated from Columbia University Teachers College program in 1943. And another point I was starting to make with Carl's orchid prints, when I received those prints from John was helpful and kind of asking questions about what we were doing about Martha. And we sat down at a computer at the Dorset Historical Society. And he says, well, why don't we just search her a little bit? And we came up with something that I had never seen, never found before. And it was from 1943 and 1944. So it's after she graduates from Columbia University's Teachers College. And she's being announced in the August of 1944, she's being announced by the University of Alabama to be a professor of art. And the school year starts in September, late August, even maybe because of the war effort, things that are different, maybe it would have started a little bit later. But this announcement is pretty emphatic that she's going to be at the university. And then I contacted the University of Alabama and their archivists, and they find no record of Martha. She never went. And in actuality, what they told me was because of factors beyond control, I guess, they decided to not have the art program established in 1944. They waited to 1945. And then the records about the establishment of that art program in 1945 list primarily men artists. And Martha gets not included. And that's where for a long time, that was 2016 when we found that. And it was so long that we could get beyond that information. But it took us to 1944. And as of today, I can say that we've gone beyond because of the auction that took place in the last few years. There was the auction of her work, her sister's work as a sculptor, and her sister's husband, Murray Hampman. And Murray Hampman was a WPA artist. He worked out in the California area first and worked with some of the Mexican artists that were influential to what are a whole emphasis of developing the mural art of the 1930s period in reaction to what existed in 1890s. The mural art that was at the exhibition, in Chicago was more allegorical and more Greek Greek and Roman gods and goddess, and whereas the emphasis with the artist in the 1930s was social reality, the realism, and regional art. And they wanted to, you know, if you have a chance afterwards, for those here, you know, this emergence of mural art is that aspect of what I'm speaking to. And we have some of the George Biddle's work and Curry at the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C. So that was a major aspect. Then I want to move on to one last comment. We are with Martha. We are up to 1950. Our last knowledge of Martha is because of records that she took one more class at the Art Students League in 1950, and she's moved by that time because they asked, the records indicate what's your address, and she's moved from Manhattan to a neighborhood in Brooklyn, and that's where we are at this point, as our story of tracing Martha is 1950. Now, another part of our exhibition is on the history of the slate quarries. 1930s was not a good period for the slate industry. And it was not even good before 1927. There was an article in one of the local newspapers written by Owen D. Jones. And Owen D. Jones represented the union. But he was speaking on behalf of the union workers and the slate companies. And he was saying at that time, a period in 1927, the industry was being hurt by the lack of a tariff on slate imports. And as you enter into the 30s, I mentioned earlier that Mr. Dickinson was a granule worker. The income made by the slate industry quarries were dropping drastically from 1927 all the way to 1947. It wasn't until after World War II that there was really any recuperation. Just one figure that I'll check my notes on was that in 1928, actually, after that article, there was an improvement. There was 1 year of an improvement, and then it went down. And in overall, from 1927 to 1936, pretty much the depths of the depression, there was almost like a 63% decrease in the earnings of the industry. But the granulars and the flowers was what was carrying the industry through, really. And I remember back in 2016, one of the slate industry owners telling me that the work that was being done for the 30s was carryover from the 1920s. If they got projects started in the 1920s, it helped get them through through the Depression era. And we highlight in our exhibition one, actually by chance, I think it works out to be a perfect example of that. And it's at Saratoga, Saratoga Spa and Reservation. And the Saratoga Spa was being redone. There was a fire in the late 1920s. They rebuilt one of the bathhouses. And then from 1931, and that was when FDR was governor, and then it extended from 1931 to 1936 with a redevelopment that really extended, and a good number of the buildings were with slate roofing. And for those who are in attendance, that's ideas of home and community spaces. You will see a couple of examples from Saratoga, and there's a framed image that's part of the Slate Valley Museum's collection from the O'Brien Brothers Slate Company, who show Victoria Pool and the slate terrace around Victoria Pool. And that was all local slate. The slate is actually just over the border. The quarry is now part of just over on the where the bank is, just in the area where the excuse me. Newmont Slate Company. Newmont has a portion of what was O'Brien Brothers. But one aspect of the Victoria Pool that I found, and I would just want to share a part of this, is that there's a story that was written not that long ago, but it goes back to talking about the Victoria Pool, and it says the elegant pool opened in 1935. Saratoga was the queen of the spas. After a thrilling day at the race course, well-heeled visitors would find themselves at the nightclubs on Saratoga Lake for fine dining, high stakes, stage shows, and with entertainment like Bing Crosby, Jimmy Durante, Desi Arnaz, and the pool itself was quite the attraction for some shows. I'm going to share this. No, I will share something a little bit later, but there is an image of that pool that I wanted to try and share if I have time with everyone. We'll see. So there were a number of architects that helped arrange that, and we highlight one who came from New York State and Syracuse area. And we actually, on our virtual exhibition, Syracuse University holds the Dwight Baum papers, and we have some items coming from Syracuse to be a part of our virtual exhibition. Okay. Now, 1975, the painting gets refurbished. The painting then ends up for a period of time in the Granville Town Hall. And when the museum opens 25 years ago, approximately a little over 25 years ago now, it comes to the Slate Valley Museum. And Dean Fausett is the artist who completed that work. And there's just a couple of points I really want to highlight with Dean. He was originally from Provo, Utah. His parents were Mormon, representing the Mormon Church, Latter-day Saints Church. and they were pioneers for the settlement of Provo, Utah. And Dean and his brother Lynn are considered esteemed Mormon artists, part of the Mormon artist group. But he was, as I think I said before, active with the National Society of Mural Painters from 1973 to 1983. And what they highlighted when he passed away in 1998, that society highlighted what he did through the bicentennial years. Not specifically our mural, but what he did with what was called the Caravan of Freedom. And there was a set of murals put together, which now belong with the City of New York Board of Education Permanent Collection of Art. And that was his, he seemed to work very hard at projects like refurbishing our mural. He, in a year before that, he refurbished his own mural in West New York, New Jersey, which is one of the highlights of our panel on Dean. Is he did a total of 3 post office murals, commissioned post office murals, and we are highlighting those. But he also was, this Caravan of Freedom was I think a part of an extension. This is conjecture, but an extension of his Mormon Latter-day Saints church beliefs. And he was putting forth energy and effort for at least the span of 10 years to help reinforce murals that spoke to the development of our country and the development of our freedoms, as the title of the Caravan of Freedoms presents to you. I have one more little story to share. All right, now, going back to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. was where the individuals who started the mural effort in Chicago became very involved with what became the plan that had originally started with George Washington and La Infante plan of the 1790s for how Washington would develop and have neoclassic buildings. And that whole effort kind of, because La Infante was involved for a very short period with the plan, and he kind of got told to move on. And it kind of sat, and things just developed until between 1902, 1901 to 1910, where there was a commission presented commission of art in DC. And those people who were key in Chicago came and pushed the idea with the support of some of the senators, the Senate Commission. And so there was a portion of DC, and it's really not, it's the National Mall and a limited area of what we would call Capitol Hill region. And beyond that, there was a little, in the map, there was a portion that it dipped down. it dips down, and that was not given over to DC for the development of these buildings and the master plan. And why was this not developed? Well, the people who owned the property wanted to hold on to the water rights. There was water rights there that they did not want to give to the city, the establishing city of Washington. And Mr. Young was the landowner in the late 1700s through the 1700s. Then he passed away and moved on to another person. And by the 1830s, who acquires the land but a gentleman by the name of Robert Isherwood? And Robert Isherwood and his wife, Martha, take ownership of the mansion. This is just off of 15th Avenue. And so it's just beyond the central DC area. And it's called the Rosendale and Isherwood Pact. And so he takes possession of it in the 1830s. It becomes his property. He takes advantage of the water rights, makes some money from it, and then he passes away. His wife, Martha, hangs on to the property. Civil War comes along. The property is basically taken over by the US government for division of the Northern Army, and became an area where they corral for horses. And the waters there was made available for the horses. And then it adds, and then when the war ends, Martha gets the property back. Martha attempts to get some reparations of what she lost in the whole process of the years because of the water rights. But she doesn't get very much. But to move the story along, the 1930s comes along, and this Rosendale and Isherwood area, there's an actual Isherwood road or street in this area. And a gentleman of several developers start building houses there. And they make a special emphasis in what I found in research to make a point that this city beautiful movement that had moved from Chicago to Washington to other cities, even Hartford, Connecticut, it develops, in central Washington, but it doesn't develop in this part of DC. The houses are much closer together, and one particular developer starts putting a price on his houses for approximately $6,500 to $7,000, and the literature is geared to mostly white residents, and not a lot of takers come along. And in the years that, just months, he then develops his advertisements to the African-American population. And they start selling at the exact same prices, the exact same price. And the neighborhood develops and to largely what it is today. And it even included a 1930s WPA project where they built a Langston golf course. Started off with 5 holes, went to 9 holes, eventually went to 18 holes. And it was, amongst other items, promoted as an area for African Americans. Okay? And so I just thought I'd highlight that too. You can see the changeover from this, wide boulevards with sculptures and buildings that have murals on the outside and inside to neighborhoods. I think of, Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford had, if you think of where some of the people attending by Zoom, I believe, know Hartford well. And I worked for a couple of years in the state office. There's a state office building next to the Capitol, kind of like the White House and Eisenhower, building, and which happens to be late 1800s building with slate and a mansard roof that we try to highlight in the exhibition. So, but in Hartford, you have the architecture of this more classical period, the stately Capitol, and Bushnell Park is behind it. Bushnell Park was this landscaping aspect. And if you go beyond that, and there's statues. And if you go beyond that area, there's Elizabeth Park. So in amongst the highways of Route 91 and 84, it's kind of lost today. But in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Hartford was part of that also. So for those in my audience and that know Hartford, that's for you folks. All right, well, we're going to start taking questions from those who are here and say goodbye to my Zoom audience. So thank you